Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Coding for Commerce, Working with Commerce Data, brought to you by Oracle NetSuite. Coding for Commerce is our webinar program designed to help support the SuiteCommerce developer community. This program will cover many different topics to help you grow your knowledge of developing on the SuiteCommerce platform. My name is Owen Fela, and I'm the manager of the NetSuite e-commerce Center of Excellence, and I'll be your moderator today. Just a few things before we dive in. Today's webinar will consist of a presentation followed by a question and answer session. This webinar is designed to be interactive and we encourage your participation. Please use the Q&A widget to submit any questions. We'll answer as many questions as we can. If we don't get to your question, no worries. We'll follow up with you directly after the webinar. This webinar is being recorded. You'll be sent a link to the replay in a few days. Please take a brief moment to review the following safe harbor statement. All right, so as mentioned, my name is Owen Fela, and joining me today as the lead presenter is Steve Goldberg, our Developer Community Manager for SuiteCommerce. As an agenda, Steve will begin with an overview of data in SuiteCommerce. Then he'll dive into elevating permissions, followed by searches, and then a comparison of SuiteScript 1.0 versus SuiteScript 2.0. And then he'll finish with bootstrapping data. And then right after that, we'll dive into our live Q&A session. So at this time, Steve, I'm going to pass it over to you. The floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. As Owen mentioned, we're going to be talking about data within the SuiteCommerce context. So before we start, I just want to go over some basics. This presentation is aimed more at intermediate and advanced users. So if you're an absolute beginner, some of this stuff may be a bit over your head, but we do have a number of resources available on the developer portal which you can use to get up to speed. So we have the Getting Started Guide, which I published about a month ago, which covers Vincent, but can equally be applied to older versions. I'm going to talk in a few minutes about why Vincent is so significant. But first, let's just take a look at how data actually gets from NetSuite to the very front end of your site, which is the template. So when you have NetSuite, you typically have a service as part of your module. The service is basically there just to handle the HTTP requests and get data, send data, update records, delete records, and then that's then handled by the model. And the model is there just to maybe tinker data, do stuff with data. It's specifying what you want to do. It's there to do the work. And then you follow this line down, you get to things like the collection. Collection is there as a group of front-end models. So if you've got something like a table or a list and you want to do repeated actions to that data, then you can create a collection. Some modules don't require it, but it's there if you need it. And then we pass that data down towards the view and the template. So the view is there as the presentation layer for the site, and the templates are there to actually serve as the HTML, the more familiar aspect of the site. So how do you actually get that data from NetSuite into your module? We do have some REST APIs, which you can make use of. For instance, if you're getting item data, then you can use the items API, which you will frequently see calls being made to it if you look at the network tab of your site. But we have an API called SuiteScript, which is proprietary to NetSuite, and it only runs on NetSuite servers. In sort of a SuiteCommerce sense, you would typically run these in service files, but we do have other ways in which you can run SuiteScript. So we've talked before about scriptable cart. You can also run SweetLips, which is what we'll be talking about a bit later. And you can also run things like integrations. But back to SuiteCommerce, it's good to think about SuiteScript in terms of records and fields. So, for example, if you're dealing with a customer, the customer's record will be everything about them. It will be an object with all their fields in it. So that will be their first name, their surname, address lines. We also have another API called the Commerce API. Typically in your code, you'll see it called models.init, and this can get sort of current information about the user or the site, generally what's specific about the current session. And yeah, service files handle all the standard HTTP requests. So why do I say that Vincent was a turning point? Well, there were two important aspects in Vincent in terms of data. The first was that we standardized service files by introducing service controllers. And one of the things that service controllers let us do was to create this family tree style of inheritance. So rather than have these individual manually written service files, we had objects which we could extend going down the tree. And what that allowed us to do was to create files which followed the AMD specification, which is the sort of standard define this file as a type of this file with this name. Obviously, that then lets us require them and to build up a list of dependencies. And it also means that we can build in things like events and extensibility. And one of those sort of extensible things that we put in are permissions and data validation. So now when you get your data, it's a lot easier to ensure that it's going to be valid and that NetSuite are going to accept it. Manually written service files still work, but we typically suggest you use service control. The second biggest thing in Vincent was the store locator functionality. So the store locator functionality allows your shoppers to find stores that are near them by doing a query on the front end. So they'll say, I'm in New York, show me all of the New York stores. The issue with that was that we don't let shoppers view location records. And so there was this problem where the permissions could not be granted and they weren't allowed to look up those fields. Now, you could change the permissions that cover all customers so that they're able to view location records, but this is bad security because we don't want them to know all of the data that's in those location records. We only want them to have access to them at very specific times, specifically when we're using the store locator functionality. And in a general sense, you should never really give out permission and access to data in times when they don't actually need them. So what we did was we implemented this sense of elevated permissions, and rather than granting access on a sort of system-wide or a role-wide basis, we allow the access of records on a per-script basis. So in other words, what we're saying is when a user uses the store locator and we know it's through the store locator, then you can let them have access based on these permissions. So we can now move on to some use case. So in terms of locations, what we could do is tinker with the store locator, but it's probably best if we sort of have a very sort of pared down example. So for this scenario, what I want is I want users to get the longitude and latitude of a certain store based on the ID that they provide through the URL. So you can see that we're going to go with example location /14 or 15 or 20. The issue, of course, is that we don't let shoppers access location records. So what we're going to have to do is, part of building up this module, give them elevated permissions. So what happens if we do go to the location. So hopefully you can see my site. So if I go to this location, we will get an internal error. Sorry, we can't load the content you requested. When we investigate this, so here we have the service that we can see is being called, we can see that we're being returned an error code here. Now, if you know anything about your HTTP error codes, then you know that 403 is insufficient permissions. So what's happening is we're saying, the server is saying, yes, we have that, but you're not allowed to see it. So what we can do is we can head into the backend NetSuite. We can look up the service file that we're using to request this data, and we can elevate permissions. So if we edit it, and then we scroll down to the permissions, we can see that we have the enabled box here. So if we enable it, we can now decide how we want to execute this service file. So in Vincent, we introduced an advanced customer-centered role. And I'll take a look at this role in a minute, but if we attach it, and then if we save, we can now rerun that call. What happens is we get another error. This time it's a slightly different error. So this is a 404 error. And you can see that what's happened is it's not found the page, and rather than return some very helpful JSON, it's returned basically an entire HTML document. And this is what causes this impossible to parse back-end error. So the issue with that is we're not running it anonymously, or rather perhaps not logged in. So if we go back to permissions, and we can do run script without login. Now if we return and then refresh, you can see that my specified location of the ID 14 has returned Suite Retail with the latitude. Well, you can see what the coordinates are. So let's just return to the presentation. We've done that. Yeah, so just to re-clarify, sometimes you get different errors depending on different situations. It's always important to check that you've enabled the right options. So the advanced customer role, if you are running Vincent, you can check this in your back end, but essentially what happens is it's the standard customer role, but it also gives an additional permission. And to visualize what that permission is, you can go to Lists, Location, View, and take a look at your company's permissions. Going forward, if you wanted to develop your own functionality, for example, to create something which accesses records which shoppers don't normally have access to, then you could customize it and use it as a basis or a template. Or alternatively, you can simply just create a new role and run your script using that role. Remember, it's generally good advice to only give permissions in the specific places that you're needed, and that's why elevated permissions is very helpful in these specific situations. So let's move on to another use case. So let's say that we have a number of customers who have abandoned their carts. And one of the things that we want to do is to show them, well, we want to suggest items to them. So how do we approach this? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to set up an account page. And when they visit it, they will see a slider of suggested items based on the items which they have in their cart. So what we're going to do is we're going to build a search. And what this does is it returns all carts with all the items in them. We're going to fetch this data using a service file and then extract the IDs of the current shopper's items. Once we have those items, we can perform a code level search on those IDs to get the parent IDs of those items. The reason that we're doing that is on my site, and perhaps on a number of your sites, you will have matrix children. Now, the correlated items are associated on a parent level rather than a child item, but the items that are in someone's carts will be child items. So there's this discrepancy where we will need to get the parent items. Helpfully, that means that we can also go through running a search. So before we do that, I just want to quickly talk about correlated and related items. So there are two kinds of suggested items that you can get back from NetSuite. One is related items. So when you edit a inventory item in NetSuite, you can manually associate items together. So if you sell a big item, then you might want to associate some accessories with it. So if you sell dresses, you might want to sell a belt with it. Correlated items are a bit smarter. They are items that have been associated together based on system-generated algorithms based on what the shoppers are buying at the same time. So once customers buy something together, they will have a very small association with each other. And then as more customers buy the items together, they will grow in significance. And there's a ranking based on how often this happens. You can, of course, check these by editing any of your product items. You just need to make sure you've got the functionality turned on. So what is a saved search? So it's one of the two main ways that you can access data in NetSuite from sort of the SuiteCommerce point of view. It's good for people who are quite visual, so like site administrators who don't deal with code, because it allows you to click through the interface to build up the sort of things that you want. And you can access it by going to List, Search, Save Searches. And it's here that you specify the sorts of things that you want back. So if I head back to my demonstration, excuse me. Should now be able to see my screen, hopefully. So if we head over to my search, this is awkward. Session expiry, it's good for security. Goodness. Okay. So what we have is search criteria, which we use as filters. And these filters are essentially the things that you want to search for. So what we can do is we can specify that a search is returning shopping carts which have a subtotal greater than 0. We could add a date restriction to this data. So we could say, well, we only want items which are older than a certain amount, and this could be the basis of the abandoned cart sort of scenario. So when we call the data, we will need to when we call the data, we will need to build up a model. And what the backend model does is we've got a function here called getAbandonedItems, and that is called by the service controller whenever there is a GET request. So we build up a number of useful variables first. So for example, we will get the user ID, we will get some filters and the IDs and parent IDs, and we'll just build some simple arrays. We're going to check if the user's logged in and then start to build up what we want back. So as mentioned, we got the search filter, which is saying use the internal ID of the current customer. And then we're going to perform our saved search. So the utils and load map search is essentially a fancy way of doing of loading saved searches. But you can look up in the backend utils file for how exactly that works. What we need to know is that it essentially calls the saved search and then returns the results. Once we have the results, we can map them. Now, the _map method is a useful way of taking an object, an array of objects rather, and then building out a new array of objects based on what's returned. So that can be useful as a way of, for example, changing the key values of data, or to manipulate data before it gets back to the front end. Here we're just doing a very, very simple one of just take the item ID out. Once we have that data, we can then call a second function called getParentIDs. This follows a similar path of building up some useful variables, and then what we're doing here is setting our criteria to any of the IDs that we've got back. So this, if you remember, is going to be an array. And then we build up the columns that we want back. So we need the parent IDs, and so we're saying return the internal IDs from the parent items of the IDs that we've just looked for. One interesting thing about this is you will obviously need the items view permission, which means that you will have to elevate the permissions on the script to do so, using what we just talked about. And then you can perform the search. So this is the NL API search record method, which then just queries items with our filters and return the columns that we want. So in my example, it's going to return a giant blob of JSON. It'll return a whole bunch of JSON, and then for each of these, we're going to do a loop, and we're going to push through. We're going to push the result of each bit of data, our parent IDs array. And then once we have that, we have the IDs that we can send back as an object. So once we have that data, what are we going to do with it? So it gets passed through, obviously, through the standard router, which is called whenever we visit the example correlated URL. It goes to the model because we've connected it to our service, and then it ends up in the view. We have standard ways of doing merchandising in SuiteCommerce Advanced, and here we have the item relations correlated view. What this does is it allows us to take an array of IDs or a single ID, and then get a whole bunch of recommended items back. So what we've done is we've added it as a dependency, and then we've created a child view. And we said, call it this, and return an instance of it based on the IDs that we've just got. If you remember, these are our parent IDs. Of course, you can you can always look up what this data is by using the Items API. So before I do that, you can see that I've got a number of products that have been returned. So 8033 returns nothing, 6594 returned nothing. So this item here, which is one of the items in my cart, is returning a savory skirt. It's returning an oblique skirt, a hoodie, and a whole bunch of other items such as a hat and a shirt and stuff like that. So we can test this now by going to our site. So here is the example correlated items. So the merchandising zone has been rendered using the IDs that we've returned. And you can see in the bottom that here are the IDs that we wanted. So a lot of these demonstrations have been using SuiteScript 1. And SuiteScript 1 is something that's been a part of the platform for many years. And it's generally the most conventional way of getting data from NetSuite. But there are, and we can also use it in the form of SweetLips. So SweetLips are like arbitrary SuiteScript files that you can run on your instance. And they can be called at any other times within NetSuite as well as externally if you've integrated with NetSuite. Using it with SuiteCommerce can be useful if you're, for example, doing, if you've got 2 bits of code and they're going to be performing the same job, you can just use a single SweetLip. They can be called in service files, just like searches, save searches, and records, and using one instead can perhaps save you some time. There is a difference, though, between what SuiteScript 1 and SuiteScript 2 is. SuiteScript 2 sort of embraces a new sort of JavaScript, AMD-compatible, rather, approach to things, which is where you have JavaScript objects and you have methods attached to them so that we no longer use the NL API or the NL OBJ prefix. So what we might have is something like record.type.salesorder. At the moment, you can't use SuiteScript 2 within service files in SuiteCommerce Advanced, but you can write a 2.0 file and then call it from your SuiteCommerce Advanced service file. So let's take a look at a scenario then for this. We're going to use SuiteScript 2 and we want to return some basic profile information about the user. So what we're going to do is we're going to write the file and then upload it and deploy it. And then we're going to call the SweetLip within our service file. And we can then display the results of this in a view. So if I now demonstrate the file. So this is a SuiteScript 2.0 file. It looks more closely like the type of JavaScript that we use within SuiteCommerce, and quite distinct from the sort of normal models and service controllers that you would associate with SuiteCommerce Advanced. Here you can see that we've got a dependency here, and that is the sort of the search API that we're going to be using for this. Note that we've actually named the function here. In my instance, I've just called it load something. You can call it essentially whatever you want. And we have a number of useful things that we need to do first. So when this script is going to be called, we're going to pass the customer's ID number as a URL parameter. And one of the things that we can actually do is pluck that out of the URL and use it within our SweetLip. Once we have that information, we can then perform a lookup based on it. So here you can see that we've got a variable called data, and it's going to be using the search API, which we've mentioned here, and doing the method lookup fields. We're specifying that we want to search for a customer based on the ID, and then to return columns such as subsidiary, country, city, phone, etc. An important part of SuiteScript 2 is the fact that you specify the headers. So we're saying that the content that we're going to be wanting back is going to be JSON. And then what we want to do with that JSON is then stringify it so that we can then use it on our site. The final thing that happens is that we return using the onRequest method. And what happens is when it's been requested, we're saying run the load something method function, which you can see here. The second important part of this functionality is going to be the model. So if you've never called a SweetLip within your code before, this is sort of roughly how you would do it. So in our service controller, we've got a get method, which says when requested, run the get method on the model. And here we're building up the URL for resolving the SweetLips URL. So here we have the NL API SuiteScript run method to resolve the URL. We're calling a SweetLip, and the SweetLip name is this. This is why I'd set it in the backend, but of course, whenever you're writing, you can call it whatever you like. And then we're also going to be calling the deploy record of the SweetLip. Once we have that, here is the URL parameter that we need. We're going to be passing the customer ID using LPI get user. And then again, we're setting the headers. Finally, we have the response. So the NL API request URL, we're saying once we have that URL, make a request using the get method. And then we can return that. So how does that look? This is what happens when you make a request for the SweetLip. So this is just obviously a simple module which just takes the information. So this is my information. And we're going to take a look at our response. And here you can see that the object returned. Very nice. Okay. So the final thing I want to talk about today is bootstrapping data. So bootstrapping in a general computing sense means that you take very, very basic software or data that a computer needs so that it can self-start. In a SuiteCommerce Advanced sense, it's a solution to a problem that some of you have already faced, particularly when you're integrating with third parties. The problem is that you're loading a page, you've got some third-party script that needs data, it needs to be called, or it needs something else, but you have to wait for all the services to load, and this is causing blocking. So the solution is then to make calls to it, to your service, at the sort of the earliest stage possible. And that stage is, for example, when SSP files are loaded. So in particular, if you're running the shopping application, then you'll know that there is shopping.environment.ssp. And if you've ever taken a look at it, you'll know that we use it to set a number of useful variables that we're going to be using throughout the entirety of the site. You can obviously also call the SC environment global variable whenever you need it. And the important thing is that it's loaded first, and this gives you the opportunity to take advantage of its priority. For example, if you have some key JSON data, you can save it in a file and then load it during this time. The method for doing this is not necessarily restricted just to JSON. You can obviously load any JavaScript during this time. So how do you associate the JavaScript that you might need with the bootstrapping method? So we have this concept of library files. Library files are additional JavaScript files that you associate with an SSP, and these are typically used whenever you bundle up some code to make it into a Suite bundle. When using them for JSON, this typically means that what you need to do is effectively create a variable name for it, which then stringifies the data. And if you want to take a look, you can see that we do this in the back end by looking up the SSP that you're editing and then going into the script libraries tab. So let's take a look at this. So okay, so what we're going to do is take a look at this. So on this page, you can upload and manage your JavaScript files. So here we have the libraries, and you can see that we have some library files already associated with SCA. Some backend data, which is effectively just a massive blob of data. So, for example, this is the data that I showed you earlier. This is the returned correlated items when I looked them up. So what I'm doing is I'm setting it as a variable called backend data. You can, of course, call it whatever you like. The trick is then to go into your shopping.environment.ssp file and actually directly edit it. Now, we don't normally recommend doing direct edits to files, but this is one method that can be used if necessary to load data. So what I'm doing is setting a new key as part of the SC environment global variable, and I'm setting the value of it to backend data. So if you can see the connection here between backend data and backend data here. And this is obviously the underscore that we use on the backend. What this means is that if I were to go to my site and I were to look up the environment file, the shopping.environment file, right at the very bottom you will see some stringified JSON data. And what that means is that if I type in sc.environment.bootstrapped data, you can see that all of this has been now returned. So I could, for example, take that, then do something like JSON dot parse it. Parse it, not string. JSON parse. Sorry, folks, but that's the idea. So we can do JSON paths to turn that JSON data into an actual usable object. There's also a second method of doing bootstrapping, and what this effectively lets you do is run an arbitrary SuiteScript file when the SC environment loads. It's a bit suboptimal in terms of bootstrapping, as you're still having to request data from NetSuite via service, but it is something which you can use if, again, if you think it's necessary. So again, at the bottom of the sc.environment.ssp file, we have a little sort of loop that goes through and searches for anything that's been added to sc.configuration.publish. And what that does is it adds a dependency and calls a specified model and a specified method on that, setting perhaps a value or a blob of data or another object to sc.environment.publish. Whatever you've set the key as. Again, there's an example that we can do with this. If I go back to my code. So if I go to my example called publish. So here I am setting what I want this to be. So I'm saying get configuration.publish push, find, set the value of the key to what I want it to be. Again, this can be anything. And the value of that key is determined by my model, which I'm going to show you in a second, and what happens when you perform the following method. Again, it doesn't have to be a get. It can be basically whatever function that you want to call it. Now, in my SuiteScript folder for this, I've got something very, very simple. It's going to be an execution log, which basically just says, hey, I've called it successfully, and then it's going to return the message that it looks like everything loaded just fine. So if I head over to my code, I can do sc dot published and here you can see that it looks like everything loaded just fine. And the benefit of this is, so the way this works is you can see at the bottom here where we set the key and then the stringified result that comes back when you call it. Just to keep in mind that these are obviously called every time a user visits a page, but the results should be cached on their device. And I think that's kind of it. So I guess I'll hand back to Owen on this, if you want to take over for the wrap-up.
Great. Thank you, Steve. All right, so before we dive into Q&A, just a few final things to touch upon. So first of all, if you haven't visited the developers.suitecommerce.com website, I strongly encourage you to do so. This is your destination for all things related to developing for SuiteCommerce. In addition, the recording of this session, as well as all future sessions, will be posted on the same site. We'll also be posting a supplementary article to help you explore commerce data in greater detail. And if you have any questions about this webinar, feel free to also email us at codingforcommerce@netsuite.com. So at this time, last topic on our agenda, we're going to dive into a Q&A. And a couple questions come through during Steve's section, but if any of you have additional questions, feel free to post them to us right now through the Q&A feature built into this WebEx or the presentation manager. So first question, is it possible to dynamically set elevated permissions? Steve or Eduardo, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I'm here. It's not possible right now. We are not allowing that, but it's in the roadmap. So we are thinking about that.
Well, thank you, Eduardo. Okay, another one coming in. Does the use of bootstrapping data improve in some way the performance of SuiteCommerce?
Okay, I will take that. Yes, the thing is, by bootstrapping, you load data when the SuiteCommerce Advanced load, and times that that data is stored in the environment file that is cached by our cache system, that will be improve the load of SuiteCommerce Advanced once that is cached. So the idea of using that is when you have to load a heavy amount of data, we recommend that generate the file and add that file as a library. If you doesn't need to load a heavy amount of data, and you instead of that are thinking about to load different fields in different windows, in different views of SuiteCommerce Advanced, you need to bootstrapping that, because once that data is cached, the other customers that will load the SuiteCommerce Advanced will read that almost instantaneously. So it is a good practice to do that.
Great, and this is a two-part question. So first part, what best practice do you recommend for exposing custom records with custom list fields? Do you suggest granting the customer center role with a create permission to the custom record?
Okay, I will answer that too. If you are talking about custom records, you don't need to use elevator permissions, because you have a subtab inside the custom record in which you will be able to set the permission for the role that SuiteCommerce Advanced is using to that specific custom record. So you're able to use the view, edit, or full access to that custom record.
Okay, and the second related question to this then, what if it was a custom list instead of a custom record?
In that case, you will need to use elevator permissions because the tab is not there.
Great. All right, then an API question. So the question is, will SuiteCommerce APIs, I'm assuming the commerce and the item search API, eventually transition from 1.0 to 2.0? So probably related to SuiteScript.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know personally what the process is for that. Eduardo, do you know?
Yeah. We are moving all the things to 2.0. The only thing that we are not moving forward is a Crystal card. But in the case of SuiteCommerce Advanced, we will just see that in the near future, because we need to move all the script that runs SuiteCommerce Advanced from 1.0 to 2.0. So yeah, the answer is yes. We are moving to 2.0.
Excellent. Excellent. And then another one, should I put third-party APIs in a service?
Could you Owen rephrase that? Or what's the idea?
So it's just, I believe that, so if you're referencing a third-party API in a SuiteCommerce page, should that be set up in a service, or is there another method you'd recommend doing so to access a third-party API?
Right. You should put that in the Backend Model. I mean, you have to keep in mind that the service is like a broker in between SuiteCommerce Advanced and NetSuite back office. So that call should be in a model of Backend.
Yeah, I mean, we have cases where it's perfectly legitimate to call third-party services from back-end services. So, for example, if you were going to add, let's say you're going to add a captcha to the newsletter sign-up, you need the information back from Google reCAPTCHA about the legitimacy of the user who's signing up, or rather submitting the form. So it's perfectly reasonable to put the call to Google into a back-end service.
Okay. And then a SweetLip question. If I call a SweetLip on my model, should I enable Run as Administrator on the SweetLip? Or does this depend on the use case?
I think generally we're trying to get away from running things as the administrator. Perhaps Eduardo can give more advice, but
yeah, you're right.
The sort of general advice is that you shouldn't have to run things as administrator, and you should try to avoid doing that. If you need to elevate permissions, then try to find the specific situation where you need to elevate the permission.
Okay, and then this might be a bit of a forward-looking statement disclaimer answer, but to the best of your knowledge, will Legacy SuiteScript 1.0 continue to be supported once SuiteScript 2.0 is supported in SuiteCommerce?
That is a forward-looking statement. So we honestly can't answer that. There is currently no plans to completely phase out SuiteScript 1. I honestly can't answer that.
All right. Well, thank you, Steve and Eduardo. It looks like all of the questions have been answered at this time. So, just to finish up, everyone, thank you for attending this webinar. And you will be sent a link of the webinar recording in a few days that will be posted to YouTube. And as mentioned, please visit developers.suitecommerce.com for all information related to developing on SuiteCommerce, as well as we'll be posting our next Coding for Commerce session once we have the topic set. Have a good rest of the day.